Okay, here with Scott McNealy. Scott, thank you very much for taking a few minutes after your innovation discussion here at TUCON, the TIBCO conference, and you're familiar with TIBCO quite a bit. How do you see their position in the market right now as in contrast to the other players that we're seeing in providing new types of services that leverage lots of different forms of data?
Well, I think TIBCO's been in the business for a long time of understanding that you needed a bus architecture to go handle the massive architectures. As I say, you can't go capillary to capillary. You need large major arteries, and kind of like the freeway system, you need the big 8-lane freeways to move the large amounts of data and large amounts of information very quickly. They're the masters at that, and they've built on top of that social networking plays with Tibber and the analytics plays of Spotfire. So they're very nicely building out businesses that play off of the large big data play that they have with their products. So they've been doing this for a long time, and they know how to do it.
Great. The time that we're in right now is becoming increasingly defined by data and how data is impacting our lives. Why did you get involved in the startup Weigh-In? Is it because you've seen this data explosion emerge? What is it about the time right now that makes this company viable?
Well, so social media has been a big play in the consumer space, but it's been quite often for activities that weren't necessarily, I mean, Angry Birds wasn't necessarily a corporate play. It didn't exactly make the CEO of a company more successful. Facebook has been an enigma for a lot of folks in terms of how do you leverage your Facebook environment. And Twitter has been kind of a one-to-many broadcast, as has been YouTube. But as a recovering CEO, I understand that corporations want to have a one-to-many conversation. They want to engage. They want a client engagement service. And so what we've done is taken a lot of the cues from the social media space and said, let's build a corporate social media experience that has true value add. So we have a one-to-many conversation tool, so you can have conversations with your fans, with your brand. Your brand can have a conversation. Your government can have a conversation with its citizens. Your CEOs can have conversations with their folks, and you can have suggestion box. You can have HR sentiment gathering, employee or customer sentiment gathering. You can do training and certification. We gamified it all, so you can have contests and leaderboards, and it's true, false, right, wrong answers, that sort of thing. It's a very, very powerful and targeted service. Weigh-In. It's a way into your customer base or your client base. It's way fun, as in Weigh-In, and then it's a way to allow people to engage and feel part of the community and not just being blasted at by a billboard or an advertisement. This is a chance for them to actually engage.
Okay. The company right now, how many employees do you have?
We have about 40 employees in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado's a great place for us to start. We were, I think, the largest employer in Colorado at Microsystems. So there's a lot of great technology, and it doesn't have to deal with the California business environment, which is ranked dead last of all of the states.
Now, do you leverage any cloud services?
We run on the Amazon cloud,
Mm-hmm.
and have basically no data center, and have been very successful ramping on that cloud.
Who do you see as your biggest competition?
I see our biggest competition being. Let me start over on that one. You know, there's a whole bunch of people trying to gather sentiment. Nielsen tries to do it through their venues. There's very simple survey tools out there on the web. You have the large annual HR surveys that people do. There are a lot of people gathering sentiment by inferring from all of the noise, the social media noise out there, but nobody's really gone out and asked for explicit demographic sentiment, intent, knowledge, and gamified it and taken it to Facebook, to Twitter, with our Twit Polls product, with our mobile products and our microsites and our ability to embed right in your websites with iframe technology. So we've really allowed you to create a conversation with a very powerful authoring tool and then express that conversation across any environment. Sort of like the old Java write once, run anywhere. We allow you to create a conversation once and expose that conversation everywhere.
Speaking of Java, how do you think Oracle has handled the Sun assets, the Sun acquisition, since the company acquired Sun a few years ago?
You know, I haven't been involved since Oracle took over. Larry's never called. I don't blame him. You know, he's a very bright guy and a great capitalist, and he knows what he's doing. He's a very bright guy, and I'm sure they're doing all the right things with the technology, but I just haven't been involved.
The future of Java, then, how do you see it in the cloud?
I think Java will be with us forever. We're certainly using Java heavily at Weigh-In as a new startup. It has great security features. It's got a ton of developers. It's got a strong security tradition. So it's a great product. It'll be there in the industry for a very, very long time. I mean, heck, we're still using COBOL, aren't we?
Yeah. What about Java's role in platform as a service? I know that you've been an advisor to Cumologic, and curious on your views on past, the past market overall and how Java plays into that.
You know, to predict the future is just too hard to do. And, before Java was even launched, nobody would have predicted that we would come out with a whole new programming language and a platform and that it would be scalable. And there's a whole bunch of stuff being invented that we never would have thought of. I mean, just a few years ago, we didn't have the iPhone, right? So it's really hard to predict. I'm not in the prediction business, but I can tell you that Java is still a very, very popular platform.
How do you view platform as a service currently, then?
That's a overbroad question. Can you help me with that one?
Yeah, well, how do you view, do you see platform as a service having a play inside the enterprise? And do you see it as, right now, taking on more multiple languages, for enterprises to use, for instance, to do application development? Or are you seeing other ways that the platform as a service market is evolving right now?
I think the cloud, which is a more elegant way of saying the network is the computer, is the model, and at what level you buy cloud services is really dependent upon what your value add is. And you might just buy down to the bare metal and put your own operating system on it, or you might just run right on top of Linux, or you might run on top of a whole bunch of web services, APIs and middleware, or you might run on top of an application. It all depends on where any particular company's value add is and at what level they want to invent. So, it's all of the above, and you might just use Google Docs.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the market overall for enterprise startups, what are the things that you're seeing now?
I'm seeing that, we were able to raise $20 million very quickly, and a lot of it from non-venture. But we went to them and explained about a dozen different ways that we had for a revenue model for Weigh-In. It was really, truly valuable to enterprises. It truly had a quantifiable return as opposed to something like maybe a Pinterest or whatever that created an enormous number of eyeballs. But yet, how do we make money on this thing? How do we draw consumer intent or infer consumer intent? So we've been able to basically grow a revenue quite aggressively. We've been doubling or tripling revenue just about every quarter this calendar year as we build out our enterprise sales force. I think enterprise social media is going to it'll grow a little slower, but it'll be far more sticky and far more durable as a platform. I've always said things can go down as fast as they go up.
In terms of disruption that these startups do create, what disruptions do you see, and do you see any particular companies or markets that are going to be more vulnerable than others?
No. But good question.
Okay. So you did talk about open source, Apple versus Microsoft right now. How do you view the open source, what's happening with open source right now? And there's kind of this funny kind of parallel where we're seeing like open enterprises emerging, where enterprises are far more porous through APIs and such, and data flowing in multiple different ways. I'm curious on your thoughts at this point in time about open source.
I still think open source needs a big major corporation to go lead it. Sun was spending a couple of $1 billion a year on R&D, and we were a top 40, I think, R&D spender, all technologies, all industries, all geographies in the world. And we were open sourcing and opening the interfaces to most of that technology. Today, I don't know who is spending anywhere near that amount of R&D that they're making open and available and shareable in that way. So I think the open source movement has lost kind of the leader of the parade in a big time way, and I don't know who stepped into that breach. Certainly with all of the IP lawsuits that you see going on with Apple and Google and Samsung and Oracle and all the rest of it, Hewlett-Packard, it's a very different world than the open and sharing one that we were trying to lead back in the old days with Sun.
Why is that we are not seeing a leader emerge? Why?
I think the big problem with open source is that purchasing agents, IT directors, and executives do not acknowledge and quantify the barrier to exit when they adopt a new technology. Whereas if they incorporated that into the total cost of ownership, the cost to buy it, the cost to install it, the cost to operate it, and the cost to switch from it as the true cost of a product, I think you would see a lot more people adopting open interfaces. But they tend to, sort of like the U.S. government kicking the debt can down the road, people kick the barrier to exit can down the road and just ignore it.
So what is it that you see needs to be done about this?
Nothing needs to be done.
Or what?
We don't need to solve the debt problem.
No, we don't. But what would you like to see done? I guess versus need.
I just think people need to educate themselves and start thinking about the full life cycle of technology products, because as I've always said, technology has the shelf life of a banana, and we ought to be thinking far more. 10-penny nails don't really go out of style, but the iPhone 4 that I have, which is now supposedly, a couple revs behind.
It's interesting what you say, and maybe this is our last point to kind of to sew this up. I know you have to run, but one of the things that I'm seeing in the events that I go to, I go to a lot of enterprise type conferences, and we see a lot of real heavy vendor marketing, and it appears to me that there's a danger there for the customer. And I think it gets back what you're talking about with open source, because there's so much that's new and so much that's available that you can start really believing that everything the vendor says, and the vendors may be very valid in what they're saying, but they're not necessarily thinking about how they need to be, what they need to be looking like in the next 5 to 10 years. And it seems, especially with data having such a huge role, that unless you have some understanding of these open environments, you really could be like just seeing the barrier get higher and higher and higher.
Absolutely, and I'll give you a great example. It's not in the IT space, but I started a .org with Kim Jones called Curriki.org, and it's a K-12 educational website where we host nearly 50,000 free and open source learning assets. let's just take third grade math textbooks. There's something you can buy into, right? They're $130 now. They are backbreakers in terms of weight, and they're no different than the third grade math textbooks that I learned on many, many, many years ago. And we have gratuitously revised them every year and created an enormous industry of selling these textbooks as if they're magical. Nothing's changed since Newton got hit on the head with an apple. 10 plus 10 was, is, and will be 20 for a long period of time. What we're trying to do with Curricula is use open source so that we can web enable, make multimedia, real-time scored, online, self-paced, make it really fun. And real-time scoring is absolutely key. You can't do real-time scoring in a textbook. You can do real-time scoring online. That's when the kids won't go to bed because they want to stay up and score more points on their math textbook. Until we can change that, and look at how hard it is to get school districts to stop buying textbooks and not to go just take it for free off of the Curricula website. You know, but we'll get there. It'll take a while, and people ultimately, you know, at some point the market just tips and everybody goes, that's brilliant. Well, you could have done it 20 years ago, but it takes people a while, and once they tip and rock and roll, they will go.
But our customers who are like buying, you know, who are buying technologies for their business, no matter what market they're in, are they facing risk right now because there is not that, you know, the degree of understanding about what it does mean to, you know, to be open?
I think the biggest, I spent a lot of my late computer career trying to convince IT directors, purchasing agents, and executives to calculate the barrier to exit. That's a very, very important calculation to make. And there isn't a CEO of a proprietary IP company in the world who's going to advertise barrier to exit. They don't want you to think about it. It's the Roach Motel, you know, the first hit of heroin is free. They want you to check in and never check out. So you're not going to hear that from people who are driving big IP companies, but, you know, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
It should be obvious. So I think that's easily the number one challenge that I think companies get themselves into.
Is that inhibiting, do you think that is inhibiting innovation, or are we just not quite understanding if that's happening yet?
I think proprietary technologies foster far less innovation than open interfaces.
Great. Well, on that note, we will end this interview. Scott, thank you very much for taking the time.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you. Cool.